Today on this stage, we're going to be talking about content routing. What is content routing? Why do we care? Content routing is the first of sort of two logical things in breaking up the work that IPFS implementations are doing. And in particular, it's answering a more tractable and concrete question of who has a given piece of content. Right? We've got a content addressed world. In general, you already have this hash identifier of the content that you're interested in. And so the question of then which providers can I go to fetch that data is one that we can break out. IPFS has a few different mechanisms that it uses to do this today across different versions. Most commonly, we use a DHT. You've probably heard about the Kademlia DHT, and that's used in IPFS for most content routing. So the roughly tens of thousands of IPFS peers that believe themselves to be accessible and long-lived will hold some of the routing records. They'll hold a chunk of the space of all of the SIDs that people are saying they have. And then as queries come in, you direct the queries to the correct peers who are able to then give you that content back. But content routing in IPFS is evolving. This year has actually been a really active year around content routing. And I think we sort of made a conscious decision near the end of last year that content routing was a reasonable boundary that we should draw, that we should think about it as a separate subproblem because it is fairly tractable. It's an interface that we can try to experiment with and try different implementations. And in particular, by having other implementations, we have the ability to try and find equivalent mechanisms that can get content much faster. And so we'll talk a little bit about network indexers through this morning, and we'll talk more generally about how content routing is growing and the extensibility that's getting added in IPFS. In general, the things to take away, content routing is a layer that can be shared, probably broader than the data transfer. So when you think about how we actually send data back and forth, IPFS today uses bitswap. It sends blocks back and forth. Filecoin makes more use of a different transport protocol called GraphSync, which has different knowledge of the structure of an interlinked set of data in order to be able to be efficient for long blockchain-like applications. But we also transfer data with things like HTTP and other protocols that actually get us data. And one of the interesting things is content routing as just answering the who has a given piece of content is a layer that can be somewhat shared across these. So as a client, I might only speak a subset of the overall data transfer protocols, but we can potentially share our participation in the content routing layer. Content routing already is pretty fast, and the development effort is going to make it very fast, pretty quickly. So network indexers, which you'll hear about later, are able to generally answer queries directly in order of a millisecond. And so then it's just a question of how many times we're replicating that and how we incentivize people to run instances of these databases close to most regions, caches in your metro area. I think we believe at this point that storage density is going up. Storage is going to get cheaper. It's not going to be unimaginable that you've got a pretty big cache that can hold most of the relevant content routing information for you as a client, certainly within your metro area. And so the content routing part of data transfer and getting traffic is something that should be sub 10 millisecond. I think is sort of a goal that we're eyeing. And then we already have in IPFS and across implementations and the various IPFS implementations that are expanding, options for experimentation. So in both IRO and in Kubo, there are hooks to delegate and try other content routing mechanisms so that rather than having just a mainline DHT, an individual client or an individual gateway can start trying other things and can attempt to keep a cache that's different, tune things. It's a place where you get to figure out what works and customize it. That's pretty easy because it is a very limited interface, which is one of the things that makes it attractive. The other part of experimentation that we'll cover on probably tomorrow afternoon primarily, is that you can do a bunch of interesting privacy enhancements over this interface. So once you've just got an interface that is, I have a SID, I want to know who has it, and have sort of a consistent database view of that overall question, that's an interface that you can start to put different privacy implementations behind and protect queries from users. So just to give a very high level overview of how Kubo has evolved over, I think, really the last 6 months. When you were looking at IPFS clients this spring, realistically, you were seeing something like this. You were seeing either your desktop Kubo client or one of the gateways, like IPFS.io. Whenever they were unable to know who had a given SID that was queried, they would go to the DHT. That was sort of what existed. This summer at IPFS thing, we gave an update on the progress of network indexers. And so network indexers is a project that the Bedrock team has worked on. So myself, Mossy, Andrew, and Ivan, that holds sort of this larger database in one machine and is betting on storage getting cheaper. And so by this summer, we had connected this network indexer to the DHT, such that queries were able to take a set of providers, like both Web3 storage and Filecoin providers, and get them through their existing queries. So when you queried into the DHT, there's a set of Hydra booster nodes, which act sort of like bridges, where as you make your request in the DHT, these nodes would not simply return their fraction, but they would also go back and query an indexer and return results that they found in that indexer as well. And so this bridged and allowed large providers that had a lot of data that they couldn't directly publish into the DHT to be able to still advertise their content such that existing clients could get it. Today, we've continued on integration work such that both clients and the gateway are able to query indexers directly in addition to the DHT. And so what this gives you is it gives you a different set of characteristics around reliability. You know that all of your queries are going to this additional database in addition to the DHT, rather than they might hit the Hydra boosters. And it means that we get to sort of experiment with this interface directly. And we're seeing that evolve as we sort of exercise it, both in privacy and in sort of what is the caching story, the semantics, and the extensibility that you want for an IPFS node, whatever that may be, to actually be able to answer quickly and safely this question of content routing. Cool. To give a sense of scale, as of sort of this summer, the network indexers had about 8 billion hashes, and that covered maybe 20% of the Filecoin content that is available, and about 100 providers that were providing that. Whereas as of sort of around now, last week, it's grown quite a bit. Right, we're at quickly approaching 1 trillion hashes, which is an order of magnitude, a couple orders of magnitude, more than the amount of SIDs that are in the DHT. So there's a lot of content that people have where they are not able to advertise all of that content in the DHT. And this was sort of the other thesis is if we're going to scale, especially with things like Filecoin, where you've got a really large imbalance in your heterogeneity of nodes. So you have a few really big nodes that just have hard drive after hard drive of content. It's not super fair, and also it's not a super good thing for them to just publish all of that content into the DHT, right? So if I look at the DHT, you've got a few tens of thousands of nodes. A lot of them are desktop nodes. In general, we're asking them to store 5 to 20 megabytes of content routing records. So they have a reasonable amount of content in there, but it's not so much that you're going to be unhappy about that being stored on your computer. But if we took all of the Filecoin content and had those Filecoin providers publish into the DHT, we'd suddenly be asking all of the desktop users to store gigabytes of content. And that starts to be a level where a lot of desktop users maybe would not be happy about that. And so that was sort of the other motivation is we know that we can make just a database that has all of this. And in fact, we can make a lot of replicas of that database. And we can come up with ways to reduce trust through replication rather than through a classic DHT mechanism.